What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
There's a kind of silence that rings louder than any scream, and I swear I heard it that night at Trader Joe's, standing next to my sister Rachel, as she calmly told me I wasn't welcome around her kids anymore. No drama. No shouting. Just that tight, glossy smile she gets when she wants to pretend she's doing something mature. It came right after I scanned my card for the groceries, her groceries, mind you, and the cashier looked up, asking if we wanted bags. That's when Rachel leaned in, barely audible, and said it like she was commenting on the weather. "I've decided you're not healthy to be around the kids this year. You bring, I don't know, toxic energy." Then she reached for her oat milk like it was just another Tuesday. And you know what? Maybe it was. Maybe it was a perfectly average Tuesday for her to cut someone off mid-swipe and pretend it's an act of self-care. But for me, standing there with my hand still on the card reader, it felt like she'd just plunged a knife under my ribs and twisted it with a gentle little smile. That moment didn't erupt. It just sank. I said nothing. No scene. No comeback. I just pulled my hand back, canceled the payment, turned, and walked out without looking at her. She called after me soft at first, then sharper, but I didn't stop. Not when she said my name, not when I heard her mumble something to the cashier, and not when I stepped out into the parking lot and realized I'd left her holding $120 worth of groceries with a dead debit card. I didn't feel proud or smug. I didn't even feel angry. I felt cold. Like something inside me had finally frozen over after too many years of bending, of swallowing things I didn't agree with, of pretending Rachel was still the baby sister I used to protect instead of the grown-ass woman who'd learned to weaponize helplessness like an art form. You have to understand something before you think I'm the villain here. I've supported Rachel for over 5 years. Not just helped in that vague, holiday dinner way where you Venmo $50 and call it love. I mean, I was the one who paid for her kids' preschool. I was the one who set up her grocery card through my bank, topped it off twice a month, covered 3 months of rent when she lost her job last summer. I was the one who canceled dates, called off meetings, stayed up late holding a baby that wasn't mine so she could sleep off whatever stress-induced migraine she swore was debilitating. And not once, never once, did she say thank you without a but trailing behind. Thank you, but you don't get it. Thank you, but you've never had kids, so thank you, but maybe don't talk to them like that. My life was reduced to a bank account with opinions that were always just a little too much for her taste. Still, I stuck around. Because family, right? Because no one else was stepping up. Because those kids, my niece and nephew, they know me. They run to me. They tell me stories and ask if I'm coming back tomorrow. And I always did. Even when I hated how she looked at me like I was some kind of unpaid employee. Even when I felt used. I stayed. Until she said that word. Toxic. That word, in the hands of someone like Rachel, doesn't mean you're harmful. It means you're inconvenient. It means you make me feel seen in a way I don't like. It means you call me out when I lie, and I'm tired of being accountable. She didn't want boundaries. She wanted submission. And when she realized she couldn't control me anymore, she reached for the label that would make me the villain and her the survivor. And so I became it. That night, I went home, opened my laptop, logged into the grocery card account, and froze it without hesitation. 2 clicks. Then I emailed the daycare, the one where I'd been silently paying part of the monthly fees as a favor, and told them I wouldn't be covering Rachel's invoice moving forward. No explanation. No apology. Just a cold, simple line. Please redirect billing to the child's legal guardian effective immediately. It was like flipping off a light switch. One that had been burning me for years. I didn't tell her I was doing it. I didn't leave a note. I didn't respond to her text the next morning when she asked if I could swing by after work. I didn't even open the message where she said she needed a quick favor. Instead, I turned off location sharing on my phone, something we'd kept open for emergencies for the kids, and I shut the damn door on every obligation I never agreed to but carried anyway. And I'll be honest, the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was loud. It came with echoing doubts, like distant thunder you pretend you can't hear. But it was mine. Then came the text. Just one line. "You'll regret this. I promise you." No emoji. No punctuation. Just a cold, sharp promise from the sister who once held my hand while I cried on a bathroom floor, but who now saw me as a threat to her carefully curated world of half-truths and Instagram-worthy motherhood. It didn't even sound like her. It sounded like someone who realized too late that the branch she'd been sitting on had been holding her up for years, and it was already cracking. I stared at that message for a long time. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because what she didn't know, what she still doesn't know, is that she's not the only one who can rewrite the story. And if she wants to go down this road, labeling people and drawing lines, then she better be ready for what happens when the person she depends on stops playing along. Because I've got 5 years of receipts. Literally. And emotionally. And I'm just getting started. There's a strange kind of freedom that comes with finally deciding to stop answering the phone, not the anxious kind, where you're scared of what might happen if you ignore the call, but the calm, detached kind where you know exactly who's calling, exactly what they want, and exactly why you're not picking up, because you've already given everything you could possibly give, and now all that's left is silence. And so, for 3 full days after I froze Rachel's grocery card and canceled the daycare payment, I let my phone ring itself into oblivion, watched her name appear over and over again, sometimes just the number when she tried from a different line, and ignored each buzz with the kind of steady hand I never thought I had. It didn't take long for her tone to change. The first call came the next morning, around 10, which was early by Rachel's standards, considering she rarely woke up before noon unless one of the kids was sick or there was some kind of drama unfolding at daycare. I didn't listen to that voicemail right away. I let it sit there like a ticking bomb in my inbox while I drank my coffee and read the news like I didn't have a sister unraveling 20 minutes away. But eventually, curiosity got the better of me, and I tapped play, expecting more of the same righteous anger I'd seen in her text. Instead, what I heard was panic. Not rage. Not guilt. Just pure, escalating panic. Her voice was breathless, too fast, like she'd been running, whether physically or just emotionally, I couldn't tell. She said the daycare had called her in the middle of her morning shift at the salon, said her payment had bounced, said they couldn't release her son until the balance was settled because he'd already been held 30 minutes past the pickup window, and they weren't a babysitting service. Rachel was half crying, half cursing, begging me to at least explain what was going on, asking if there was some kind of mistake or if I had forgotten to process the payment, because she couldn't believe I would just cut it off without warning. But of course I had. That was the point. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I just sat there, quietly stunned by how fast the roles had reversed. For years, I'd been the one chasing her down for receipts, for confirmation, for acknowledgement, for something resembling gratitude, and now she was the one left scrambling to make sense of a world where the safety net had disappeared overnight. You might be wondering if I felt guilty. I did, in flashes, sharp and sudden, like lightning through a dark room, but they faded quickly, replaced by the memory of every time she'd taken me for granted, every time she'd looked me in the eye and asked for just one more week, or just a little bit extra this month, like it didn't cost me anything. I remembered the Saturday I canceled a work trip to Boston because Rachel had forgotten it was the kids' field day and needed someone to show up and cheer them on, only for her to post selfies from a rooftop bar that night with some caption about self-care Saturdays. I remembered the time she asked me to cover rent because her landlord was threatening to evict her, and I wired the money before realizing she'd used part of it to buy a new iPad for work. Guilt doesn't last long when it has a full archive of betrayal to compete with. Still, I listened to the next few voicemails, because even though I'd cut her off, I couldn't quite cut myself off from the curiosity, the desire to know just how far she'd spiral without me there to catch her. The second message was shorter, more venomous. She accused me of doing this on purpose, of sabotaging her life, because you can't stand to see me do better than you, which was laughable considering the context. The third one was longer and strangely formal, where she asked me to confirm whether this decision was permanent and warned me she'd be seeking other options for support, so the children don't have to suffer for your emotional immaturity. As if this was a custody battle and not a long overdue decision to stop enabling her. By the fourth message, her voice was cracking again, and I could hear her son in the background, whining about wanting mac and cheese, which she kept shushing while trying to sound composed. She told me she'd figured out I'd turned off location sharing and said that was incredibly childish, as if it wasn't a direct response to her labeling me toxic in a grocery store and humiliating me in front of two other moms who now probably think I'm some bitter single witch trying to control my sister's family like it's a Netflix drama. But what struck me the most in those messages wasn't her desperation or her rage, it was how fast she pivoted between the two, like someone flipping channels on a broken remote, unable to decide whether to beg, blame, threaten, or guilt her way back into my good graces. One second she was crying, the next she was accusing me of trying to destroy her life, and then, by the sixth voicemail, she was saying she missed me, that the kids had been asking about me, and that maybe we could meet for coffee and talk things out like sisters, which might have sounded genuine if not for the dozens of previous messages where she made it clear I was the villain in her redemption arc. What Rachel didn't understand, and maybe never will, is that forgiveness isn't a switch you flip just because you've decided you're ready to say sorry. It's a process. A slow, agonizing process of rebuilding trust brick by brick, and she had spent the last 5 years hammering at the foundation with every manipulative smile, every half-truth, every passive-aggressive dig about my lonely lifestyle. I couldn't just go back. Not this time. That night, after I got home and made dinner in silence, no cartoons playing in the background, no half-eaten chicken nuggets on the floor, no baby bottles in the sink, I opened her last voicemail. It was short. 4 words. You've made your choice. And I had. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly understand yet, was that this choice wasn't about punishing her. It wasn't about revenge or pride or proving a point. It was about finally stepping out of the role she had written for me without my consent. I wasn't the fixer. I wasn't the backup parent. I wasn't her emotional punching bag or financial safety net or guilt-fueled ATM. I was done. And what she did next, well, that wasn't my responsibility anymore. But of course, Rachel never really accepted no as an answer. And when people like her feel abandoned, they don't just disappear quietly. They escalate. There are certain things people say when they think they hold the power, words they let fly freely because they're convinced they'll never have to eat them, promises made in heated moments or cold ones, doesn't matter which. Because they've always assumed the fallout will be someone else's mess to clean. And I can tell you, without exaggeration, that Rachel had once looked me straight in the face, eyes glazed over from either wine or entitlement, and said, "I don't need your help. I'll never be that desperate. If I ever find myself leaving pathetic voicemails begging you for anything, shoot me." At the time, I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I knew she'd already left 4 voicemails that week alone asking for favors disguised as quick things. But the tone back then had always been laced with a kind of smugness, the kind of arrogance that's born when you believe the person you're leaning on will never walk away, no matter how much you lean. That kind of confidence comes easy when you've spent years being rescued. So when the first batch of voicemails had rolled in after I pulled the plug, after I froze the grocery card, stopped the daycare subsidy, and turned off location sharing, I had assumed they'd taper off. That she'd find a new lifeline, maybe even a new villain to blame, and eventually settle into whatever narrative she needed to cope. But that wasn't what happened. Because when you cut someone off after enabling them for years, you're not just changing the financial arrangement, you're cutting off oxygen to a machine that only runs on dependency, and when that happens, the desperation doesn't go away quietly. It multiplies. It metastasizes into something ugly. Over the next several days, I received 11 voicemails from Rachel. 11 distinct recordings, each more unhinged than the last, each shifting in tone like a weather pattern no one could predict. I didn't listen to them all at once. I spread them out, sometimes one in the morning with my coffee, another late at night while brushing my teeth, like episodes of a show you hate yourself for watching, but can't seem to stop. The first few were predictable, if a bit frantic. She opened with accusations, pivoted into performative concern about my mental state, and closed with backhanded questions like, "Are you okay? Because this really isn't like you. At least, not the old you." I didn't respond, and that silence seemed to send her spinning into phase two. The next three messages were soaked in guilt, hers, mine, ours. She talked about the kids. How confused they were. How my niece, Anna, had drawn a picture of me at school and cried when the teacher asked if I was still coming over for game night. She said my nephew, Caleb, kept asking when I'd take him to the aquarium again. And there was a part of me, a soft, shameful part, that felt the sting of that missed their voices and the way they'd fight over who got to sit next to me at dinner. But I also remembered the way Rachel weaponized those moments, turned them into currency she could trade every time she needed something, every time she wanted to make sure I remembered what I was walking away from. And I reminded myself, again, that love freely given is not love freely exploited. Voicemail number 7 was where everything turned. Her voice was lower this time, and she sounded tired in a way that didn't feel performative. She said she knew she'd pushed me too far. She said she hadn't meant what she said at the store, that the toxic comment came from a place of frustration, not truth. But then she said something else, something that made my stomach drop in a way no apology ever could. I know what you did. And if I talk, it won't be good for you. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. There's a kind of threat that doesn't need context to hit you in the chest like a hammer, because it opens a door you thought had been welded shut years ago, and suddenly you're standing in front of something you've worked very hard to forget. And as soon as she said those words, I felt the floor shift underneath me, because I knew exactly what she was referring to, even if she was bluffing, even if she had no intention of dragging it into the light. 10 years ago, Rachel had found herself tangled in a mess so serious that it could have left her with a criminal record, or worse. She'd been caught in a scheme involving fake returns at her old retail job, and even though the total amount wasn't huge, the charges were serious, and she was terrified. She came to me sobbing, said she couldn't tell her parents, couldn't lose her job, couldn't go to jail. And like a fool, or maybe just like a sister, I stepped in. I paid for the lawyer. I signed off on a quiet settlement. I even told our parents. The money had been for me, that I was dealing with medical bills from a surgery I never had. And until that voicemail, I had assumed Rachel understood the weight of that act. That she would carry it with her as a kind of unspoken gratitude, a debt she would never dare to call in reverse. But now, it seemed, she was either willing to use it against me or simply wanted me to think she might. And I couldn't decide which version of her was worse, the one who'd actually blackmail her sister, or the one who'd toss that line into a voicemail just to see what it might shake loose. I didn't call her back. But I didn't delete the message either. I saved it, stared at it, replayed it more than once, trying to hear what was between the lines, trying to understand whether I was being threatened or warned. Because sometimes, with Rachel, the line between the two wasn't clear, and that was what made her dangerous. The final 4 voicemails were a carousel of manipulation. In one, she cried so hard I could barely make out the words. In the next, she laughed, said she didn't need me anyway, that people like me, bitter, alone, cold, always die alone, surrounded by cats and regrets. The one after that was quiet. Almost too quiet. She spoke slowly, like she was trying not to scare herself with what she was saying. I don't want to hate you. I just don't know how to forgive someone who could cut off their own family like we're nothing. And then, the last message. Just 6 words, said calmly, flatly, like she was reading them off a script. You will regret this. Very soon. No rage. No sorrow. Just certainty. I sat there, phone in hand, wondering how many times she'd have to break something between us before I stopped mourning what it used to be. Because at some point, the heartbreak has to end, doesn't it? At some point, it has to stop being sad and start being something else, something colder, cleaner, and far less forgiving. And maybe, just maybe, I was already there. There are moments in life, very few, but sharp and unforgettable, when your past, which you thought you had buried under enough years, distractions, and justifications, suddenly comes clawing back through the floorboards like some half-dead thing, dragging mud and memory into a house you've spent years pretending is clean. That's exactly how I felt, sitting alone at my kitchen table in the dim yellow light of early morning, listening once again to Rachel's seventh voicemail, the one where she said, with that strange, icy calm in her voice, "I know what you did. And if I talk, it won't be good for you." It was not a bluff. Not with the way she said it, not like a tantrum or a threat, but like a slow burn, like a countdown. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She just said it. And that, in some ways, made it worse. Because I did know what she meant. I had known from the very first time I replayed that message, hell, probably from the moment I heard it, that there was only one thing Rachel could have been referring to. It wasn't guesswork. It was certainty. The kind that comes with a sinking stomach and a pounding heartbeat, because even if a decade has passed, even if the players involved have moved on or disappeared, even if the memory has been folded and locked away in some back drawer of your mind, the truth doesn't age. It waits. Quietly. And the moment someone so much as breathes near it, the whole thing comes alive again. 10 years ago, Rachel made a decision that should have changed her life forever, but didn't, only because I stepped in and made sure of it. She had been working at a small chain store, one of those generic home goods places where everything smells like cinnamon and plastic, and she was barely making enough to cover gas, rent, and her habit of treating herself to little things she couldn't afford. It started small, fake returns, rerouted refunds, falsified discounts for customer satisfaction, but like most things with Rachel, once she saw how easy it was to manipulate the system, she kept pushing, kept bending the rules until they finally snapped. By the time she was caught, the store had enough documentation to press charges for fraud, and the police had already been contacted by the time Rachel called me in tears. I remember the call vividly. It was late past midnight, and I had been asleep, only half conscious when I answered, thinking it was another drama about a breakup or her car breaking down. But the moment I heard her voice, ragged, broken, terrified in a way I hadn't heard since we were kids, and she broke her arm falling off the neighbor's swing set, I knew something real had happened. She said she couldn't go to jail. She said Mom and Dad couldn't know. She said if I ever loved her, really loved her, I would help fix it. And so I did. I drained nearly all of my savings, money I had been slowly building to finally put a down payment on a one-bedroom condo near the coast. I hired her an attorney. I sat through every meeting, nodded when I was told how lucky she was that the store didn't want to go through the hassle of pressing full charges, especially once restitution was offered and legal agreements were signed to ensure silence. I even paid off the last installment on her behalf when she came up short. I protected her from the fallout. I swallowed the shame of knowing she had done something criminal, knowing she would likely never fully understand the gravity of what I had rescued her from. And I told our parents the money had been for medical expenses related to an outpatient surgery I never had. They bought it. Why wouldn't they? I was the responsible one. The one who never asked for anything. The one who always cleaned up the messes left behind by other people. For a long time, I convinced myself it had been worth it, that my silence, my sacrifice, had preserved something vital. But as I sat in that kitchen, listening to her use that secret like a blade she might one day unsheath and turn back on me, all I could feel was rage, not at her, though there was plenty of that, but at myself. Forever believing she would carry gratitude instead of leverage. Because of course Rachel wouldn't keep that moment sacred. Of course, she wouldn't protect the memory of what I'd done for her. She would store it like ammunition. She would wait until the tides shifted. And then she would aim it straight at me. The next morning, I opened my laptop and pulled up an old folder I hadn't touched in years. It was labeled documents, but I knew what was inside. Legal forms. Email chains. Bank transfers. Copies of settlement agreements. I hadn't looked at them in almost a decade, but I never deleted them. Part of me had always known Rachel couldn't be trusted, no matter how many years passed or how many times she promised she'd changed. I scrolled through the files slowly, rereading names and numbers, letting the details wash over me like a bitter wind. Not because I wanted to relive it, but because I needed to remind myself that I had been the only reason her life hadn't collapsed back then, and that she had somehow managed to twist even that into a threat against me. I didn't call her. I didn't reply to her messages. But I wrote something I hadn't written before, a list. A full list of everything Rachel had ever asked of me, every dollar, every hour, every favor that had chipped away at my time, my energy, my career, my mental health. I wrote down every time I'd lied for her, every time I'd canceled plans, missed sleep, skipped vacations, or covered for her to someone who didn't know better. It wasn't a revenge list. It was a reckoning. It was the beginning of a new story, one where I wasn't the supporting character in Rachel's chaos anymore. And when I finished the list, I sat back in my chair, read it again, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel confused or conflicted. I felt clear. Coldly, painfully clear. Rachel had crossed a line. Not because she needed help again, not even because she expected it, but because she thought the one person who had saved her before could be bullied into doing it again. And she was wrong. The next day, I got a message not from her, but from someone else. It was her ex, the father of her kids. He didn't call. He didn't leave a voicemail. Just a simple text message that said, "I don't know what's going on between you two, but the kids are scared. And Rachel's not okay." I stared at that message for a long time, longer than I care to admit. Because if Rachel was unraveling, she wasn't going to unravel quietly. And I had a sinking feeling I hadn't seen the worst of it yet. There is a moment, a split second really, when you hear something you weren't prepared to hear, not because you couldn't have imagined it, but because somewhere deep down you convinced yourself it would never come to that, and in that moment, the rest of the world seems to stop, or at least slow down, not in any romantic or cinematic way, but in that cold, almost clinical stillness where your body reacts before your mind does, and your breath catches not from shock exactly, but from recognition. The eerie confirmation that something inside you had been waiting for the shoe to drop the entire time. That was exactly how I felt when I pressed play on Rachel's final voicemail, that 12th and last message in a chain of unraveling pleas, accusations, backhanded apologies, and manipulative guilt trips, only this one was different. And I knew it before she said a word, just from the way the recording opened, quiet at first, no immediate voice, just the soft ambient sound of a house that no longer felt alive. Her voice, when it did come through, was hoarse, like she'd been crying or yelling or maybe just worn down from the exhaustion of spinning her stories into webs that had finally started to collapse under their own weight. She didn't launch into a monologue or a dramatic confession. She didn't even use my name at first. She just said, slowly, deliberately, "You win. I'm sorry. Please don't shut me out forever." Then came a pause, long, uncomfortable, and filled with something that felt heavier than words, and after what felt like forever, she added, "The kids miss you. I miss you. I know I went too far." That should have been enough, right? A resolution. A turning point. A breaking of the cycle. But there was more. There's always more with Rachel. Because just as I was about to stop the message, to close the phone and try to process what she'd said, her voice returned, softer now, almost too soft to hear, like she didn't want to say it out loud but couldn't stop herself. "And if you don't come soon," she said, "you'll regret it." I mean it. That was the moment everything stopped. There was no screaming in her voice, no overt threat, nothing explicit enough to report, but I knew something wasn't right, not in the way you know something's wrong because you see smoke or hear glass breaking, but in the way you know your own blood pressure is spiking. In the way your gut clenches when the silence that follows is not peace, but the vacuum after impact. I sat there, frozen for what must have been 15 full minutes, heart racing in a way that didn't feel noble or brave, just panicked, like some feral instinct had taken over. And then, without planning it, without thinking through what I'd say or do or how it might unfold, I grabbed my keys, threw on the nearest jacket, and got in the car. The drive to her house was a blur, 37 minutes of irrational thinking, back and forth internal battles, and that persistent, gnawing dread that maybe I had waited too long, maybe this power game had gone too far. Maybe my refusal to play savior one more time had pushed her to a place she wasn't equipped to handle. The sky was overcast, that dull gray that makes everything look flatter and more lifeless than it really is, and as I turned into her street, I noticed right away that the driveway was empty. Her car was gone. I parked in front, engines still running, and sat there for a moment, my hand hovering over my phone, wondering if I should call someone first, her ex, the police, even our parents, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. Not before I saw with my own eyes what I was walking into. So I got out and walked to the front door, expecting it to be locked, expecting resistance of some kind, but instead, the handle turned with no effort at all. Unlocked. Wide open to the world. The living room was dim, the curtains drawn, the television off. I called her name, quietly at first, then louder, but no answer came. I stepped inside, cautiously, not out of fear for myself, but because the silence in that house felt unnatural, like I had entered a space that had recently been occupied, but was now abandoned in a hurry. That kind of silence has a shape to it, an absence so defined you can almost see it pressing against the walls. On the couch, I found her two kids, curled up together under a blanket, fast asleep, their faces smudged with what looked like remnants of dinner, or maybe just the wear of a long day. My stomach twisted. Where was she? In the kitchen, the light above the sink was on, casting a harsh glow over a space that looked clean but tense, as if someone had tidied up while trying to hold it together. And that's where I found it, the note. One single sheet of paper, resting neatly on the counter, folded in half with my name on it. Not sis. Not you. Just my actual name, like a formality in a legal proceeding. I unfolded it with shaking hands, already knowing I wouldn't like what was written inside, already hearing her voice in my head as I read the words she'd left behind. You wanted me to learn. I did. You wanted me gone? Now you got it. The kids have dinner. They've got water. I need some time. Don't worry. I'll be fine. Just stop trying to control everything. You don't know what it feels like to fall. That was it. No apology. No dramatic confession. Just a note that felt like both an explanation and an accusation, as if she wanted me to feel both relieved and guilty in equal measure. And it worked. I stood there in her kitchen, gripping that note like it might change if I read it enough times, while two innocent kids slept a few feet away, completely unaware that their mother had walked out without so much as a goodbye. I didn't know what to do. Call the police? Report her missing? Wait. I was paralyzed, caught between years of emotional fatigue and a fresh wave of panic that this time, maybe the damage wasn't so easily swept under the rug. Because whatever her reasons, whatever her version of the story would be later, she had still walked out. Left them. Left me. And worst of all, she'd left me in a position I had sworn I would never be in again, the one picking up the pieces after her storm. I didn't cry. Not then. I didn't even feel sadness in the traditional sense. What I felt was something colder. Something heavier. The realization that all my efforts to build boundaries, all my desperate attempts to detach and protect myself from her cycles, had somehow landed me in the exact place I had tried to escape. The one holding the fallout. The one with the note. The one who, despite every ounce of distance I'd tried to put between us, was now standing in her kitchen, reading her words, and wondering what came next. Because Rachel didn't disappear. Not really. I knew she'd be back. She always comes back. But the question wasn't whether I'd open the door next time. The question was whether I still had any part of myself left to lose if I did.